The first light of morning did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, almost as if it were careful not to disturb the quiet world resting beneath the fading stars. The sky above the Roman countryside changed from deep blue to soft gray, and little by little, a gentle ribbon of pale gold appeared along the distant horizon. The camp was still. Thousands of men rested behind rows of sturdy leather tents, surrounded by a strong wooden wall that had been built only the evening before. Outside the walls, the fields stretched into the distance, covered with dew that shimmered faintly whenever the growing light touched each tiny drop of water. The air felt cool. It carried the quiet smell of damp earth, fresh-cut timber, cold iron, and the faint smoke from fires that had burned low during the night. Somewhere beyond the camp, a bird began its morning song. Another answered from farther away. Their voices drifted gently across the silent fields before fading once more into stillness. Inside one of the tents, a Roman soldier slowly opened his eyes. There was nothing unusual about this morning. In truth, very few mornings in his life were unusual. He had slept on a simple blanket spread across the hard ground. Beneath him, the earth was firm but familiar. After years of military life, comfort no longer depended on soft beds or thick pillows. Rest came wherever there was enough peace to close one's eyes. Around him, several other soldiers were still sleeping. Some breathed deeply. Others shifted quietly beneath rough wool blankets as the cool morning air slipped inside the tent through small openings in the leather walls. For another few moments, nobody spoke. Silence was a familiar companion. The soldier sat up carefully. His joints felt stiff from yesterday's long march. His shoulders remembered the weight of his shield. His feet still carried the dull ache that came after walking mile after mile beneath armor and heavy equipment. None of this surprised him. It was simply part of life. Outside, someone quietly added another piece of wood to a fading fire. The dry branch cracked softly before small flames slowly appeared again. Thin gray smoke curled upward into the cool morning air. Soon, another soldier stepped outside his tent. Then another. The camp did not suddenly wake. Instead, it slowly stretched into another day. Men spoke in calm voices. Someone laughed quietly at a simple remark. Wooden buckets scraped gently across the ground as water was carried from nearby barrels. Leather sandals pressed softly against packed earth, leaving faint footprints that would soon disappear beneath hundreds of others. Near the center of the camp, a cook carefully stirred a large iron pot hanging above glowing coals. Inside the pot, simple porridge slowly thickened. Grain. Water. A little salt. Sometimes there would be herbs. Sometimes not. It was not exciting food. It did not need to be. It gave strength. And strength was more valuable than rich flavors. The smell drifted gently through the camp. Warm. Plain. Comforting. Several soldiers gathered nearby, patiently waiting with wooden bowls in their hands. Nobody hurried. There was enough for everyone. Patience was another lesson military life quietly taught. Our soldier stepped outside his tent. The cool air brushed across his face. He took one slow breath and looked toward the eastern sky, where the sun had not yet fully appeared. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfectly still. No marching. No orders. No hammering. Only the peaceful sound of birds greeting another ordinary morning. He appreciated moments like these. Not because they were rare, but because they were small. Small moments often passed unnoticed. Yet they quietly became the memories a person carried for many years. He bent down beside a wooden bucket filled with cold water. The surface reflected the brightening sky. He dipped both hands inside. The water felt sharp against his skin. He washed the dust from his face. Then his hands. Then the back of his neck. It was enough. Nearby, another soldier carefully sharpened a small eating knife using a flat stone. The slow scraping sound blended with the gentle crackling of nearby fires. Nothing felt rushed. Everything followed familiar routines that had been repeated hundreds of times before. The Roman army was famous for its victories. Yet victory was built upon mornings that looked very much like this one. Quiet mornings. Ordinary mornings. Mornings filled with small tasks completed carefully, one after another. No great battle could begin without simple routines. No long journey could start without breakfast. No shield could protect its owner if its leather straps had not been checked. No sword remained dependable without regular care. The great history remembered by future generations often rested upon ordinary habits that almost nobody noticed. The soldier reached for his folded tunic. The wool felt slightly rough beneath his fingers. It still carried the smell of smoke from many campfires and the dust collected from long roads traveled over many weeks. He slipped it over his head. Then came his thick belt. Each movement was slow. Practiced. Almost effortless. He had repeated these same actions so many mornings that his hands hardly needed thought to guide them. Outside, the eastern sky grew brighter. Golden light slowly touched the tops of nearby trees. Tiny drops of dew sparkled briefly before disappearing beneath the warmth of the rising sun. The camp had almost fully awakened now. Yet the day still felt peaceful. It was only beginning. And before any marching could start, before shields were lifted onto tired shoulders once again, before long roads stretched endlessly ahead, there remained one quiet ritual that every Roman soldier understood well. The careful gathering of armor, piece by piece, just as another ordinary day quietly unfolded. The first rays of sunlight settled gently across the camp, touching the tops of tents before slowly reaching the ground below. Shadows stretched long across the packed earth, and the cool air still held the freshness of the night. It was the kind of morning that seemed to move at its own quiet pace. The soldier stood beside his small collection of belongings. Everything he owned while serving with the army could be gathered into a few simple items. There was no large chest filled with treasured possessions. There was no room for unnecessary comforts. Life on campaign encouraged a person to carry only what truly mattered. His tunic was already in place. Now he reached for his belt. It was made from strong leather that had softened after years of use. Tiny marks covered its surface where buckles had rubbed against it, where rain had soaked into it, and where the sun had dried it again. Every scratch told the quiet story of another ordinary day. He wrapped the belt around his waist and tightened it with practiced hands. The familiar weight settled comfortably against him. From the belt would soon hang the tools that accompanied him wherever he went. Nearby, another soldier quietly adjusted his own clothing while speaking in a calm voice to a friend. Their conversation drifted through the cool air, never growing loud enough to disturb the peaceful morning. Someone yawned. Someone else stretched tired arms toward the brightening sky. The camp continued waking one small moment at a time. Our soldier reached for a pair of thick wool socks. They were simple. Not perfectly matched. Not perfectly clean. But they protected his feet, and that mattered more than appearance. Long marches were easier when small comforts were not forgotten. After pulling them on, he sat carefully upon a low wooden stool and reached for his sandals. Roman military sandals were built for walking. Strong leather straps crossed over the feet before wrapping securely around the ankles. Their thick soles had carried him over smooth roads, rocky hills, muddy fields, and dusty valleys. Some stones had worn tiny marks into the leather. A few repairs were visible where careful stitching had strengthened weak places. He inspected each strap before fastening it. One broken strap during a long march could become an endless source of discomfort. Small problems often became large ones when ignored. He stood again and shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Everything felt secure. Only then did he reach toward the most familiar pieces of his equipment. His armor rested upon a simple wooden stand. In the quiet morning light, the polished metal reflected soft golden colors from the rising sun. It was not shining brightly like a precious treasure. Instead, it carried the gentle glow of something that had been cleaned with patience many times before. He ran one hand across its surface. The metal felt cool. Very cool after the night air. Tiny dents remained from years of service. Most were hardly noticeable. Each had been carefully hammered back into shape whenever possible. Roman soldiers took pride in caring for their equipment. Not because anyone admired beautiful armor, but because dependable armor protected lives. The soldier lifted the armor carefully. It was heavy. Heavy enough that every morning his shoulders remembered its weight before it even rested upon them. Slowly, he lowered it over his tunic. The familiar pressure settled across his chest and back. The leather straps hung loosely for a moment. Then he fastened them one by one. Each buckle produced a soft click. Not hurried. Not delayed. Simply another step in a routine repeated almost every day. Nearby, several soldiers helped one another tighten difficult straps. One reached behind another's shoulders. Another adjusted a loose buckle near a friend's side. Nobody thought much about these small acts. Helping each other had become as ordinary as breathing. Once his armor was secure, the soldier rolled his shoulders gently. The weight shifted into its proper place. His movements became slower than they had been only moments before. Armor offered protection. But it also reminded every soldier that the day ahead would require steady effort. He next reached for his small cloth pouch. Inside were a few simple items. A sewing needle. Strong thread. A sharpening stone. A small piece of cloth. Nothing expensive. Nothing decorative. Yet every object had earned its place through usefulness. He tied the pouch securely to his belt. Not far away, the smell of warm porridge drifted once again across the camp. More soldiers gathered near the cooking fires. Wooden bowls changed hands. Steam rose gently into the cool morning air. Some men quietly ate while sitting on fallen logs. Others remained standing. No one lingered for long. The day's work always waited. A soft breeze moved through the camp. Tent walls fluttered quietly. The banners near the command tent swayed with slow, graceful movements. Somewhere beyond the wooden walls of the camp, sheep could be heard calling across distant fields. Life outside the camp continued just as peacefully as life within it. The soldier reached for his helmet. It rested upside down upon a wooden crate. The inside was lined with worn padding that made the heavy metal slightly more comfortable during long hours of marching. He lifted it with both hands. Its weight felt familiar. Almost comforting. There had once been a time when wearing it all day had seemed exhausting. Now it simply felt normal. He lowered it onto his head. The world immediately sounded different. His hearing became slightly quieter beneath the metal. The gentle morning sounds remained, but they seemed softer now. He fastened a chin strap. Not too tightly. Just enough to keep it secure. He nodded once. The helmet remained steady. Satisfied, he bent to lift his shield. It leaned against a wooden post where it had rested overnight. The shield was taller than many people imagined. Its curved shape fit naturally against his body. Layers of wood, leather, and metal combined to create something both sturdy and dependable. Its painted surface had faded over time. Rain had softened some colors. Dust had hidden others. Yet the markings remained easy to recognize. Every soldier knew the shield almost as well as he knew his own hands. The weight settled against his arm. His muscles adjusted without thought. Years of practice had quietly shaped his body to carry it. Finally, his hand reached for the sword hanging beside the shield. The short blade rested inside its worn scabbard. He did not draw it. There was no reason to. Instead, he gently checked the grip. The leather wrapping remained firm. The sword sat securely at his side. Everything was ready. He looked around the camp once more. The quiet morning had almost disappeared. Not because it had become noisy, but because purpose had slowly replaced stillness. Fires burned a little brighter. Voices became slightly more frequent. Officers walked calmly between the rows of tents. Mules stamped their feet beside loaded wagons. The smell of breakfast mixed with fresh cut wood and cool morning air. Nothing felt dramatic. Nothing felt hurried. This was simply another ordinary beginning to another ordinary day in the life of a Roman soldier. Soon, after a simple meal shared with his companions, the long road waiting beyond the camp walls would quietly call them forward once again. The shield rested comfortably against the soldier's shoulder as he made his way across the camp. Around him, the quiet rhythm of the morning continued without hurry. The sky had turned a gentle shade of pale blue, and the last traces of dawn slowly disappeared behind the growing light of the sun. A cool breeze wandered between the rows of tents. It carried the comforting smell of warm grain, wood smoke, and fresh earth. The breakfast fires had been burning for some time now. Thin streams of gray smoke drifted upward before disappearing into the calm morning sky. Their scent was familiar to every man in the camp. Our soldier followed the smell without thinking. He had done so on hundreds of mornings. The cooks had already filled a large iron pot with thick porridge. One after another, soldiers stepped forward holding simple wooden bowls. There was no crowd pushing from behind. No impatient voices. Everyone knew that breakfast would come, just as it always did. Waiting quietly had become another part of military life. When his turn arrived, the cook smiled only slightly. Neither man spoke. There was little need. The cook dipped a wooden ladle into the steaming pot and poured a generous serving into the bowl. The porridge was thick enough to hold its shape for a moment before slowly settling. A pinch of salt had been added. Someone had found a few wild herbs the day before, and their gentle scent floated above the warm steam. It was not a feast. It was not meant to be. The Roman army depended upon simple food that could be prepared almost anywhere. Grain was dependable. It traveled well. It lasted a long time. Most importantly, it gave strength for another day of walking. The soldier thanked the cook with a quiet nod before moving away from the fire. Nearby stood a rough wooden log that had become a bench many mornings before. Several soldiers already sat there, eating slowly while watching the camp continue its gentle awakening. He found an empty place among them. The wood felt cool beneath him. For a few moments, nobody spoke. The only sounds came from wooden spoons gently touching bowls. Steam drifted upward into the morning air. Birds continued singing beyond the camp walls. One soldier closed his eyes for a moment as he enjoyed the warmth of the meal against the cool morning air. Another carefully blew across each spoonful before eating. Nobody rushed. The road would still be waiting. Our soldier lifted the first spoonful. The porridge was warm and smooth. The grain had softened during the long cooking. Its flavor was simple, plain, comforting. He did not expect excitement from breakfast. He expected enough strength to carry his shield for another long march. That was all. As he ate, he watched the camp around him. A pair of soldiers carried buckets toward the well. One of the blacksmiths had already begun heating his small forge. Tiny sparks danced upward as he worked a hand bellows with steady movements. Nearby, a mule quietly chewed dried grass while its handler adjusted the ropes securing heavy packs to its back. The animal flicked its ears from time to time, paying little attention to the busy camp. Life moved gently forward. Every person knew their task. There was comfort in such familiar routines. A young recruit sat not far away. His armor still looked newer than most. The leather straps remained stiff. His sandals had not yet worn into the shape of his feet. He held his bowl carefully with both hands, looking around as if every detail of the camp deserved careful attention. Across from him sat an older soldier whose beard had begun showing streaks of gray. He ate slowly, calmly. Nothing seemed capable of surprising him anymore. Years in the army had given him a peaceful patience. The younger soldier quietly asked a question. The older man answered with only a few words. Then both returned to eating. There was no need for long conversations. The morning itself seemed complete enough. Our soldier finished half of his meal before reaching into a small cloth pouch hanging from his belt. Inside was a piece of coarse bread baked several days earlier. The loaf had grown firm, almost hard. He broke off a small piece. It cracked with a quiet sound. He dipped it into the warm porridge. Slowly the bread softened. Its rough edges disappeared beneath the steam. This simple habit made every meal a little easier. Nothing was wasted. Roman soldiers learned to value every piece of food. No one knew exactly what tomorrow's meal might bring. The bread disappeared one bite at a time. Nearby, another soldier shared a small handful of dried olives with two friends. The olives were salty, wrinkled from drying beneath the sun. They passed them from hand to hand without counting who received more. Small acts of sharing happened naturally. No one made a great event of them. A little farther away, someone poured watered wine into clay cups. Fresh water was always important, but watered wine was common at many meals. It was simple, refreshing, part of everyday life. The soldier accepted a small cup. He drank slowly. The cool liquid washed away the warmth of the porridge. For a few quiet moments, he simply sat. Breakfast had ended. Yet no orders had been given. The peaceful pause between eating and marching was one of the gentlest parts of the day. The sun climbed a little higher. Golden light spread across the camp. Drops of dew slowly disappeared from the grass outside the walls. The morning air became slightly warmer. Not enough to feel hot. Only enough to remind everyone that another day had truly begun. One by one, empty bowls were returned to the cooks. Wooden spoons disappeared into small bags. Men adjusted belts, tightened sandals, lifted shields once more. The quiet camp slowly transformed into a place ready for movement. Without shouting, without rushing, only through countless small actions performed by hundreds of practiced hands. Our soldier stood. He stretched his back carefully beneath the weight of his armor. The simple breakfast had done its work. His body felt ready. His mind felt calm. He looked once toward the open gate in the wooden wall. Beyond it, a Roman road stretched into the distance like a long gray ribbon disappearing over gentle hills. It had been built with remarkable care. Stone upon stone. Layer upon layer. Strong enough to carry armies. Smooth enough to last for generations. Today, it would quietly carry them once again. With one steady breath, the soldier stepped toward the gate, joining the slow-moving line of men who were preparing to leave the safety of the camp and begin another long day upon the endless roads of the Roman world. The line of soldiers moved slowly toward the open gate, not because they were tired, but because there was no reason to hurry. Each man knew exactly where he belonged. Years of practice had taught them that an orderly beginning often led to an orderly day. The wooden gate stood wide open. Just beyond it, the Roman road waited in quiet silence. It had been there long before this particular camp was built, and it would remain long after the soldiers had continued on their journey. The road asked for nothing. It simply stretched across the countryside, patient and dependable, leading from one distant place to another. Our soldier reached the gate and stepped outside. His sandals met the smooth stones beneath his feet. The road felt firm. Even after many years, it was difficult not to appreciate the skill of the builders who had laid each stone so carefully. Rainwater flowed into shallow ditches along the sides instead of collecting in puddles. The surface remained solid through changing seasons, allowing travelers to continue their journeys in almost every kind of weather. Many roads in the Roman world looked much like this one. Straight whenever possible. Strong beneath countless footsteps. Quiet during the earliest hours of the day. The soldiers gathered into their familiar marching formation. No loud commands echoed across the fields. Instead, officers gave calm instructions, and each man quietly took his place. It happened almost without thought. Like water finding its natural path. Our soldier adjusted the strap that supported his shield. The leather pressed gently against his shoulder. The weight felt exactly as it had yesterday. Exactly as it had the day before that. He no longer noticed it after the first few minutes of walking. The human body has a remarkable way of accepting familiar burdens. A signal was given. The first ranks began moving. Then the next. Then another. Like a slow river flowing from the camp, hundreds of soldiers stepped onto the road together. The sound was soft. Leather sandals touched stone with steady rhythm. Step after step. Not perfectly together. Not perfectly apart. Simply the quiet music of many people walking toward another ordinary day. Behind them came the supply wagons. Their wooden wheels rolled slowly over the carefully laid stones. Now and then a wheel creaked. A mule shook its head, causing the small bronze bells on its harness to ring softly for a moment. The sound drifted through the cool morning air before fading once again into silence. The camp slowly disappeared behind them. Its wooden walls became smaller. The rows of tents faded from view. Soon only the faint column of smoke rising from breakfast fires remained visible above the distant trees. Then even that disappeared. Now there was only the road. The countryside opened gently before them. Fields stretched across the rolling land, their grasses still carrying traces of the morning dew. Wild flowers grew beside the roadside. Small white blossoms nodded gently in the breeze. Bright yellow flowers reached toward the warming sun. Tiny blue flowers hid among the taller grasses, easily missed unless someone happened to look carefully. Our soldier noticed them. He often noticed small things during long marches. There was little else to occupy the mind. The steady rhythm of walking left room for quiet observation. a butterfly drifted lazily across the road. It landed upon a nearby flower for only a moment before continuing its slow journey. A rabbit appeared at the edge of a field. Its ears stood tall as it watched the passing soldiers. After deciding there was no danger, it disappeared into the tall grass with 2 quick leaps. Birds circled overhead. Some searched for insects among the fields. Others simply rode the gentle morning breeze. Their shadows slipped silently across the road. The soldiers continued walking. Nobody spoke very much. Conversation during a march often came in small pieces. A few quiet words. Then several minutes of silence. Then another short conversation. No one felt the need to fill every moment with talking. The road itself seemed to encourage peaceful thoughts. Our soldier walked beside a friend he had known for several years. Neither could remember exactly when they had first met. Perhaps it had been during training. Perhaps while building another camp many seasons ago. It hardly mattered now. Friendship had quietly grown through shared work rather than memorable introductions. His companion looked toward the sky. "It may be warm this afternoon," he said softly. Our soldier nodded. "The breeze will help." That was all. The conversation ended naturally. There was nothing more that needed saying. A few rows ahead, another pair of soldiers quietly discussed repairing a sandal strap during the next rest. Behind them, someone spoke about hoping to find fresh apples if they passed through a nearby village. Simple conversations. Simple concerns. Life rarely consisted of dramatic moments. Most days were built from ordinary thoughts about weather, food, tired feet, and tomorrow's work. The road gently climbed a low hill. The march became slightly slower. Armor shifted with every step. Shields pressed a little more firmly against tired shoulders. Nobody complained. They simply kept walking. At the top of the hill, the land opened into a wide valley. Morning sunlight spread across fields of grain that swayed gently in the breeze. Small farmhouses rested among clusters of trees. Thin streams of smoke rose from their chimneys. Families had begun their own morning routines long before the soldiers appeared. From this distance, everything seemed peaceful. A farmer guided 2 oxen across a field. Children chased one another near a wooden fence. A dog barked briefly before returning to its quiet watch beside the farmhouse. Life continued. The soldiers were only passing through. Our soldier breathed deeply. The fresh country air carried the scent of growing wheat, damp soil, and distant pine trees. It was different from the smoky air inside the camp. Different from the crowded streets of large towns. Each place had its own quiet smell. Each became familiar for a little while before another journey began. Hours passed almost unnoticed. The sun climbed steadily higher. The coolness of the morning slowly gave way to gentle warmth. A few soldiers loosened their cloaks. Others wiped a little sweat from their brows. The pace remained unchanged. Steady. Patient. Reliable. It was never a race. The Roman army could travel great distances not because it hurried, but because it continued. One step. Then another. Again. And again. The miles quietly disappeared beneath thousands of sandals. Before long, the officers at the front noticed a broad oak tree standing beside a small stream just beyond the next bend in the road. Its wide branches cast a generous patch of shade across the grass, and the clear water flowed gently over smooth stones. It was the kind of place where tired feet could rest for a little while before the long road called them onward once again. The marching column slowed almost without anyone noticing. The officers near the front raised a hand, and the signal passed quietly from one group of soldiers to the next. No loud orders were needed. After years of marching together, the men understood these small movements as easily as they understood the rhythm of their own footsteps. One by one, the soldiers stepped away from the road. The white oak tree welcomed them with its deep green branches. Its leaves whispered softly whenever the breeze wandered through them, creating a gentle sound that blended with the steady murmur of the nearby stream. The shade felt cool. After walking beneath the growing warmth of the morning sun, even a little shade seemed like a generous gift. Our soldier carefully lowered his shield onto the grass. He rolled one shoulder, then the other. The familiar weight disappeared for a moment, leaving his body feeling strangely light. He smiled to himself. Every soldier knew that feeling. The shield had become such a constant companion that setting it down always felt unusual, even if only for a short while. Nearby, several soldiers removed their helmets. Cool air touched hair that had already become warm beneath the metal. Some closed their eyes for a few peaceful moments. Others simply listened. The stream flowed over smooth stones with a quiet, endless rhythm. Water never hurried. It simply continued. The sound carried across the little clearing, soft enough to calm even the busiest thoughts. Our soldier walked toward the water. The bank was lined with smooth pebbles polished by countless seasons of flowing water. Small patches of green moss clung to larger stones, and delicate ferns grew wherever the ground remained damp. He knelt carefully. The stream was clear enough to see every pebble beneath its surface. Tiny fish drifted through the gentle current. They moved without fear, unaware that hundreds of soldiers rested only a short distance away. He dipped both hands into the water. It was wonderfully cold. The coolness spread across his fingers before running down his wrists. He splashed a little water across his face. Dust from the road disappeared instantly. For a brief moment, the cold water chased away every trace of warmth left by the morning march. Several other soldiers did the same. One filled a leather water skin. Another quietly washed a wooden spoon from breakfast. Someone farther downstream carefully rinsed a cloth before hanging it across a nearby branch to dry. No one disturbed the peaceful place more than necessary. The stream had been flowing long before they arrived. It would continue flowing long after they had gone. Returning to the shade, our soldier sat with his back against the wide trunk of the oak. Its bark felt rough beneath his tunic. Above him, sunlight filtered through hundreds of leaves, creating shifting patterns upon the ground. Every small breeze rearranged the light. Bright patches appeared. Others faded. Nothing remained exactly the same for very long. A small squirrel hurried along one of the lower branches. It paused for a moment, watching the unfamiliar visitors below. Its tiny nose twitched. Its tail flicked once. Then it disappeared higher into the tree. One of the older soldiers quietly chuckled. They always think we are more interesting than we really are. A few nearby men smiled. The moment passed gently. Nobody laughed loudly. The peaceful mood remained unbroken. Another soldier reached into his travel bag and removed a handful of dried figs. Without saying anything, he offered them to those sitting nearby. The figs passed from hand to hand. Each man took only one. Perhaps two. There was enough to share, but no one wished to take more than was needed. Our soldier accepted a single fig. Its skin had become wrinkled during the journey. Its sweetness was gentle rather than strong. It made a pleasant change after the plain breakfast of grain and bread. As he ate, he watched the countryside. Beyond the stream lay open meadows filled with tall grasses that swayed like gentle waves beneath the breeze. Dragonflies darted above the water. Their delicate wings caught flashes of sunlight before disappearing again into the shade. Wildflowers nodded quietly along the banks. White, purple, yellow. Tiny splashes of color scattered across the green landscape. Far in the distance, a shepherd guided a small flock of sheep across a hillside. From where the soldiers rested, the people looked no larger than small moving figures against the wide land. Even their voices could not be heard. Only the occasional soft ringing of sheep bells drifted faintly across the valley. The morning continued to grow warmer. Sunlight reached higher into the sky. Yet beneath the great oak, the air remained pleasantly cool. Some soldiers leaned back against their packs. A few quietly closed their eyes. Not to sleep. Only to enjoy a few peaceful minutes without walking. One young recruit carefully removed a sandal. He examined the sole. A tiny pebble had found its way inside during the march. He shook it free before putting the sandal back on. Such a small thing could become a painful problem after many miles. Experienced soldiers knew that comfort often depended upon paying attention to very small details. Nearby, another man patiently rubbed oil into the leather straps of his shield. Dry leather could crack. Cracked leather could fail. Every quiet rest offered another chance to care for the equipment that cared for them. Our soldier reached for his own shield. He inspected its edges. Everything remained strong. The iron rim showed a few fresh scratches from yesterday's work building the camp. Nothing serious. He brushed away a little dust with the edge of his cloak. Satisfied, he rested it once more against the tree. Above, clouds drifted slowly across the blue sky. They were soft, thin, almost weightless. For a little while, one cloud covered the sun. The countryside became slightly cooler. The shadows deepened. Then the cloud moved on, and warm light returned once again. Time passed quietly. No one counted the minutes. There was no need. The officers understood that a good march required moments of rest, just as surely as it required steady walking. Eventually, one officer rose to his feet. He adjusted his belt, lifted his helmet, looked along the resting column. Without raising his voice, he gave a simple signal. The peaceful pause had come to its natural end. Around a great oak tree, soldiers slowly stood. Helmets were fastened. Water skins were tied securely to belts. Shields returned to tired but familiar shoulders. The quiet stream continued to sing over its smooth stones as though nothing had changed. One by one, the men stepped back onto the Roman road. The shade remained behind them. The cool water kept flowing. And with calm hearts and steady feet, they began another gentle stretch of the long journey, never knowing that before the afternoon was over, they would stop again not to fight, but to build another camp with the same patient care they had practiced countless times before. The road stretched quietly ahead as the soldiers resumed their steady pace. Behind them, the gentle sound of the stream slowly faded until it became only a memory carried by those who had rested beneath the great oak. Once again, there was only the rhythm of walking. Step after step. The road curved through gentle hills and crossed wide fields where summer grasses swayed in the warm breeze. The sun continued its slow climb across the sky, and the cool freshness of morning gradually gave way to the comfortable warmth of afternoon. Our soldier settled into the familiar rhythm of the march. His shield rested against his shoulder. His sword hung quietly at his side. The weight of his armor no longer seemed heavy. His body had accepted it once again, just as it always did. There were long stretches when almost no one spoke. Silence did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. Every soldier carried his own thoughts while the miles slowly slipped away beneath countless sandals. Sometimes our soldier thought about home. Not with sadness. Only with quiet curiosity. He wondered how the fields might look during the season. Whether the wheat had grown tall. Whether his father still repaired the old fence beside the orchard every spring. Whether his younger sister still fed crumbs to the birds each morning before the rest of the household awoke. These were gentle thoughts. Small thoughts. They came and went like clouds drifting across the afternoon sky. Before long, the countryside began to change. The open fields slowly gave way to patches of woodland. Tall oak trees stood beside ash and elm, their broad branches offering welcome shade across parts of the road. The sunlight filtered through thousands of green leaves, creating moving patterns upon the stone beneath the soldiers' feet. The air became cooler here. It smelled different. Fresh leaves. Tree bark warmed by sunlight. Damp moss growing near the roots. Somewhere high above, birds called softly to one another. A woodpecker tapped patiently against an old tree trunk. Farther away, a gentle breeze stirred the forest canopy, producing a quiet rustling that seemed almost like distant waves upon the sea. The column continued forward. No one disturbed the peaceful woodland more than necessary. The soldiers understood that nature had its own quiet rhythm. They were only passing through. As the afternoon wore on, the officers at the front occasionally glanced toward the sun. They were not simply measuring time. They were thinking ahead. A Roman army did not wait until darkness arrived before deciding where to sleep. Every evening followed a careful routine. Long before sunset, a place would be chosen. Then work would begin. The camp had to be ready before nightfall. Our soldier knew this well. He had helped build so many camps that he had long ago stopped counting them. Each one looked different at first. Some stood beside rivers. Some rested on gentle hills. Others were built on open plains where the land stretched as far as the eye could see. Yet despite their different surroundings, the work remained almost exactly the same. Late in the afternoon, the column reached the top of a gentle rise. The officers paused for a moment. From there, they looked over the land ahead. A broad meadow lay below. A small stream curved along one side. The ground appeared dry and level. Nearby stood a grove of young trees that could provide timber. Everything needed for another night's camp was close at hand. One officer quietly nodded. The decision had been made. The signal passed down the line. The soldiers slowly left the road and entered the open meadow. There was no excitement. No cheering. Only calm understanding. Everyone knew what came next. Our soldier lowered his shield onto the grass. For a few moments, the meadow remained almost perfectly quiet. Only birds sang overhead. The breeze whispered through the tall grass. Then, as though guided by an invisible rhythm, hundreds of men began working at once. Some measured the ground. Others marked the outline of the future camp. Experienced surveyors carried simple measuring rods and lengths of rope. They walked carefully across the meadow, ensuring that the streets inside the camp would be straight and orderly. Nothing was left to chance. The Roman camp was never a collection of tents placed wherever there happened to be empty space. It was planned, measured, organized. Every path had a purpose. Every tent had its place. Every soldier knew exactly where he belonged. Our soldier joined a group assigned to digging. He removed a sturdy iron shovel from the tools carried with the baggage. The earth felt soft enough after recent rains. That would make the work a little easier. A shallow trench had already been marked. He placed the blade into the ground, pressed down with his foot, lifted a heavy piece of earth, then another, and another. The work was steady, not rushed. Around him, hundreds of shovels entered the soil with quiet rhythm. Metal touched earth. Earth landed beside the growing trench. Again. And again. The sound spread across the meadow like slow music. Nearby, another group chopped young trees into sturdy wooden stakes. Axes struck wood with measured blows. Each strike echoed softly through the open field. Fresh-cut timber filled the air with a clean, pleasant scent. The sharp smell of green wood mixed with warm grass and freshly turned soil. It reminded our soldier that every camp was built from the land itself. Nothing was wasted. The trees became walls. The earth became protection. Simple tools became shelter. As the trench slowly deepened, another team planted sharpened stakes just behind it. One by one, they stood upright, forming the beginning of a strong wooden barrier. By the time evening arrived, the peaceful meadow would have transformed into a secure Roman camp. Travelers passing the next morning might hardly believe that such a place had appeared in only a few hours. Our soldier paused for a moment. He leaned upon his shovel. A small bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. Then he looked around. Everywhere he turned, men worked calmly. Nobody shouted. Nobody argued. There was no confusion. Each person understood his task. Years of practice had turned difficult work into ordinary routine. Even the youngest recruits had learned that building the camp was just as important as marching. A soldier could not rest safely unless everyone contributed. Slowly, almost quietly, the empty meadow began to change. Straight lines appeared where only grass had been. The trench stretched farther with every passing minute. Wooden stakes rose toward the sky. Inside the growing walls, soldiers began unloading wagons, laying out roads, and preparing the places where tents would soon stand. It was as though an entire little town was gently growing from the earth itself. The sun drifted lower in the western sky. Its golden light spread across the meadow, touching fresh-cut wood, polished helmets, and the newly turned soil. The long shadows of the workers stretched across the grass, moving slowly as the afternoon slipped toward evening. There was still much to do before darkness arrived. Soon the tents would begin to rise, and with them would come another familiar evening of simple meals, quiet conversations, and well-earned rest after another ordinary day in the life of a Roman soldier. The afternoon sun had begun its slow journey toward the western hills. Its bright light was no longer directly overhead. Instead, it settled gently across the meadow, giving the fresh earth a warm golden color. Long shadows stretched beside the growing walls of the camp, and every passing hour brought the quiet promise of evening. The trench surrounding the camp was nearly finished. The piles of earth beside it had become a low bank, and behind that bank stood rows of sharpened wooden stakes driven firmly into the ground. From a distance, the empty meadow had almost disappeared beneath careful human hands. Only a short time earlier, it had been an open field. Now it was becoming another Roman camp. Our soldier rested his shovel against the earth and stretched his back. The muscles in his shoulders felt tired, but not painfully so. It was the comfortable kind of tiredness that came after honest work. Around him, other soldiers did the same. Some rubbed dust from their hands. Others drank quietly from leather water skins. No one lingered for very long. The work was not yet complete. An officer walked calmly along the newly finished trench. He stopped now and then to inspect the depth. He looked closely at the rows of stakes. Sometimes he nodded. Occasionally he offered a few quiet words of instruction. The corrections were small. A stake that leaned slightly. A section of earth that needed smoothing. Nothing dramatic. The camp had been built with care. That was always the goal. Our soldier picked up his shield once more and walked toward the center of the camp. The ground inside had already begun to change. Surveyors had marked straight paths crossing one another at neat angles. Even before the tents appeared, the streets were already taking shape. It was remarkable how quickly order emerged from an empty field. Men carrying bundles of wooden poles passed by. Others unfolded heavy pieces of leather that had been tied carefully during the march. The tents were simple. Strong wooden poles formed the frame. Thick leather stretched tightly over the top to keep out wind and rain. They were not large. Several soldiers shared each one. Space inside was limited, but after years of service, nobody expected anything different. Our soldier found a place assigned to his group. The ground had already been measured. Each tent always stood in nearly the same position relative to the others. Routine made everything easier. Without speaking very much, the men began their work. One soldier held a wooden pole upright. Another secured the crosspiece. A third spread the heavy leather covering across the frame. The material felt stiff in places where it had dried beneath many days of sunshine. In other places, it remained soft from careful oiling. The familiar smell of leather filled the air. It mixed with the scent of fresh-cut timber and newly turned earth. Soon wooden pegs were driven into the ground. Each strike of the hammer echoed softly across the camp. Tap. 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 The sounds came from every direction. Not loud. Not hurried. Simply steady work carried out by hundreds of practiced hands. Little by little, the tents appeared. One row. Then another. Then another still. From above, the camp would have looked almost perfectly ordered. Straight lines. Equal spaces. Everything in its proper place. The Roman army valued such order. Not because it looked beautiful, but because everyone knew exactly where to go. Even after sunset, a soldier could find his tent without confusion. Our soldier stepped back for a moment. The tent was complete. Its leather sides moved gently whenever the breeze passed through the camp. He tightened one rope that seemed slightly loose. Satisfied, he gave it a gentle pull. It held firmly. Nearby, one of his companions carefully swept loose stones away from the entrance. Sleeping on hard ground was already uncomfortable enough. Removing a few sharp rocks could make the night a little easier. Another soldier spread blankets neatly inside. Simple wool blankets. Nothing more. No soft mattress. No raised bed. Only the earth beneath. Yet after a full day of marching and building, even hard ground often felt welcoming. As the camp continued taking shape, the sound slowly began to change. The sharp rhythm of digging grew quieter. The steady chopping of axes became less frequent. Now other sounds filled the evening air. Mules snorted softly as their heavy packs were unloaded. Wooden barrels rolled carefully into storage. Cooking pots were carried toward the center of the camp. Small fires began appearing one after another. Thin gray smoke drifted lazily upward into the cooling sky. Our soldier watched as one group unloaded sacks filled with grain. Another stacked bundles of firewood beneath a simple shelter. Nothing was done carelessly. Food had to remain dry. Tools had to be ready for tomorrow. Every small task mattered. A camp that functioned well depended upon hundreds of ordinary actions completed with patience. Near one of the fires, a young recruit struggled to tie one corner of his tent. The rope slipped loose again and again. An older soldier noticed. Without a word, he walked over. He knelt beside the young man. His hands moved slowly. He tied the knot once. Then loosened it. Then tied it again, allowing the recruit to watch each movement. The younger soldier copied him carefully. This time the knot held. The older man smiled quietly. Then returned to his own work. Nothing more needed to be said. Such lessons happened every day. Not through long speeches, but through simple example. The afternoon breeze carried the smell of supper beginning to cook. Someone stirred another large pot above a growing fire. Grain was poured in. Water followed. Soon steam began rising into the evening air. The familiar scent drifted across the camp. Many soldiers noticed it at once. Empty stomachs quietly reminded them that breakfast now felt very far away. Our soldier smiled gently. There was comfort in familiar smells. The smell of cooking grain. The smell of wood smoke. The smell of leather drying after a warm afternoon. These ordinary scents had become part of military life. The sun lowered still farther. Its golden light softened into shades of amber and pale orange. The tops of nearby trees glowed warmly for a few peaceful moments before their shadows slowly lengthened across the meadow. Birdsong gradually became quieter. Some birds settled into the trees for the night. Others made one final flight across the evening sky before disappearing into the branches. The air itself began to cool. It was only a little cooler at first. Just enough for a few soldiers to pull lightweight cloaks around their shoulders. The long day's warmth slowly drifted away. Our soldier stood at the entrance of his finished tent. He looked across the camp. Only hours earlier, this had been an empty meadow. Now neat rows of tents stood behind strong wooden defenses. Cooking fires flickered gently. Men walked calmly along straight paths. Officers quietly inspected the final preparations. It almost felt like a small town that had quietly appeared before sunset. The remarkable thing was that tomorrow, after another day of marching, this entire place would disappear once again. The tents would come down. The fires would be extinguished. The soldiers would continue along the road. Only the empty meadow would remain. Perhaps a traveler passing days later would notice the shallow trench or a few footprints in the grass. Perhaps even those would soon fade beneath wind and rain. Such was the rhythm of a Roman soldier's life. Always building. Always moving. Always leaving behind places that had briefly felt like home. As the last light of day settled gently over the camp, the cooks called the nearby soldiers to gather for the evening meal, where warm food, quiet conversation, and the welcome comfort of shared company would bring another peaceful day to its unhurried close. The first stars had not yet appeared, but the bright colors of the afternoon were already beginning to soften. The sky above the camp slowly changed from warm gold to gentle shades of pale orange and quiet blue. Along the western horizon, the sun rested just above the distant hills, filling the land with a peaceful glow that seemed to touch every tent, every tree, and every wooden stake surrounding the camp. The day's work was finally complete. For the first time since morning, there was nowhere left to march. No trench remained to be dug. No tent waited to be raised. No wagon needed unloading. The soldiers could simply rest. Our soldier walked toward one of the cooking fires near the center of the camp. The flames danced quietly beneath a large iron pot suspended from a sturdy wooden frame. Dry oak logs cracked gently as they burned, sending small showers of orange sparks drifting upward before disappearing into the evening sky. The smell was comforting. Wood smoke mixed with the rich scent of simmering grain and vegetables. Someone had added onions. Someone else had found a handful of wild herbs growing beside the road earlier that afternoon. Their gentle fragrance floated above the pot, carried slowly through the cooling air. It was still a simple meal. Perhaps a little more interesting than breakfast. But only a little. A cook stood beside the fire with a long wooden spoon. His face reflected the warm glow of the flames. Without hurry, he stirred the thick stew again and again, making certain that nothing settled against the bottom of the pot. Nearby, another cook sliced coarse loaves of bread into generous pieces. The bread was dark, dense, still slightly warm from baking earlier in the day. Its crust cracked softly beneath the knife. One by one, soldiers gathered around the fire. Some carried wooden bowls. Others held small clay cups. They formed a quiet line, speaking only in gentle voices while waiting their turn. No one complained about the wait. The meal would be served to everyone. There was no reason for impatience. When our soldier reached the front, the cook smiled with quiet familiarity. He filled the wooden bowl with a generous serving of stew. The thick mixture steamed in the cool evening air. Small pieces of onion floated among the grain. A few beans rested near the surface. The herbs gave the meal a pleasant scent that seemed richer than its simple ingredients might suggest. Our soldier thanked him with a nod. Then he accepted a piece of fresh bread. It felt warm against his hand. The warmth was welcome after spending the afternoon working with cool earth and rough timber. He walked a short distance away and found a place beside the fire where several of his companions were already sitting. Large stones had been arranged into rough seats. Some men preferred fallen logs. Others simply sat upon folded blankets spread across the ground. There was no proper dining hall. The open evening sky served as the roof. The soldier lowered himself carefully onto one of the stones. His knees welcomed the chance to rest. His shoulders relaxed now that the shield leaned safely beside him. His helmet rested on the ground within easy reach. For a little while, he simply held the warm bowl between his hands. The heat slowly spread into his fingers. The day had left a faint chill beneath the evening breeze. The bowl chased that chill away. He took the first bite slowly. The stew was thick, soft, comforting. The onions had become sweet during the long cooking. The beans added a little more substance. The herbs brought a gentle freshness that reminded him of the countryside through which they had marched. No one expected luxury. The food did exactly what it was meant to do. It filled empty stomachs. It restored strength. It offered quiet comfort at the end of another ordinary day. Nearby, one soldier dipped pieces of bread into his bowl before eating them. Another sprinkled a small pinch of salt across the top of his meal. A third quietly shared a few dried apples that he had purchased several days earlier in a village market. The slices had become slightly tough. Still, their sweetness was welcome. He passed them around the circle. Each man accepted only one. There would be enough for everyone that way. The fire crackled softly. Its warm light danced across polished helmets stacked nearby. Shadows moved gently across the leather walls of the tents. Every movement of the flames created a different pattern. The camp felt peaceful. Not silent, but peaceful. From somewhere farther away came the quiet laughter of another group of soldiers. Elsewhere, someone softly hummed an old marching tune while cleaning his wooden bowl. The sound never grew loud. It blended naturally with the evening around it. Our soldier looked upward. The sky had become darker. The first evening star now shone above the eastern horizon. Soon another appeared. Then another. One by one, the stars quietly returned to the sky, just as they had every evening before. Without thinking, the soldier tried to recognize familiar patterns among them. Some stars had watched over him since childhood. They had looked down upon the farm where he was born. They had watched him during training. They had followed him across rivers, forests, hills, and distant provinces. No matter how far he traveled, the stars always seemed quietly familiar. Across the fire sat one of the oldest men in the unit. His beard had turned almost completely gray. Fine lines surrounded his eyes. He held his bowl carefully, eating slowly as he always did. A younger recruit asked him how many years he had served. The old soldier paused for a moment before answering. "I stopped counting after many winters." The younger man smiled. "So you do not know?" "Oh, I know enough." He looked into the fire. "I know the roads better than I know the towns. I know the smell of fresh camps more than the smell of my own village. And I know that every evening meal tastes better after a long day's work." A few quiet chuckles circled the fire. Not loud. Not lasting very long. The old soldier smiled as well. Then everyone returned to eating. The conversation faded naturally. There was comfort in that. No one felt the need to keep talking simply to fill the silence. The silence itself was pleasant. As bowls gradually emptied, some soldiers stood to wash them. Others remained beside the fire, enjoying its warmth while darkness slowly settled across the camp. The cook scraped the last of the stew from the bottom of the pot. Nothing was wasted. Leftover bread was carefully wrapped in cloth. Water barrels were covered. The evening routine continued with the same patient care that had marked every part of the day. Our soldier brushed a few crumbs from his tunic. He reached for his clay cup and filled it with cool water from a nearby barrel. The water tasted fresh. After the warm meal, it felt especially refreshing. A soft breeze wandered through the camp once again. This time it carried the scent of cooling grass and distant pine trees. The warmth of the afternoon had almost completely disappeared. Night was arriving gently. Around the camp, more small fires flickered to life. Their glowing light reflected softly against the newly built wooden walls. The camp no longer looked like a busy place of work. It looked like a peaceful village settling into another quiet evening. Soon the officers would assign the first watch of the night. While most soldiers prepared for well-earned sleep, a chosen few would remain awake beneath the stars, walking slowly along the wooden walls and listening to the calm sounds of the dark countryside beyond the camp. The evening meal had come to its quiet end. The last bowls were washed with cool water from wooden buckets. The cooking pots were carefully scrubbed while they were still warm, making tomorrow's work a little easier. Fires that were no longer needed were allowed to burn low, their bright flames slowly settling into beds of glowing red coals. Night continued to arrive one gentle moment at a time. The western sky held a faint ribbon of orange for a little while longer. Then it faded into soft shades of blue. Soon even those colors disappeared, leaving only the deep, peaceful darkness of a clear Roman night. Above the camp, the stars seemed brighter than they had only a few moments before. There were so many that it almost felt impossible to count them. Without the lights of great cities, the sky revealed itself completely. A pale band of countless distant stars stretched across the heavens from one horizon to the other. It looked almost like a river flowing silently through the darkness. Our soldier stood outside his tent for a few quiet moments. The cool evening air brushed gently across his face. The warmth of the fire still lingered in his clothes, but the breeze carried the fresh scent of grass, damp earth, and nearby trees. Somewhere beyond the camp walls, an owl called softly. Its low voice drifted across the meadow before disappearing into the night. Not far away, crickets had begun their steady evening song. Their tiny voices blended together into one endless sound, rising and falling like gentle waves. The camp itself had grown quieter. Men spoke in lower voices now. Many were already preparing for sleep. Some spread blankets inside their tents. Others carefully folded extra clothing to use as simple pillows. A few quietly repaired small tiers in tunics by the light of nearby fires. The day had been long. Tomorrow would be another long day. There was comfort in preparing for rest. Our soldier knelt beside his belongings. He removed his helmet first. The familiar weight lifted from his head, and he placed it carefully upside down near the entrance of the tent. Inside, the worn leather lining still held a little warmth from the day's march. Next came his shield. He leaned it gently against one of the wooden support poles. It had protected him through countless journeys. Even while resting, it remained close enough to reach without standing. His sword stayed nearby as well. Still inside its scabbard. Still clean from the careful attention he gave it every evening. No soldier wished to wake before dawn only to discover that rust had quietly appeared overnight. Small habits mattered. They always mattered. Just then, footsteps approached along the neat path between the tents. An officer walked slowly through the camp. His voice remained calm as he spoke with each group of soldiers. He carried a small wax tablet. From time to time, he marked something upon its smooth surface. When he reached our soldier's tent, he stopped. "You have the second watch tonight." Our soldier nodded. "I understand." The officer returned the nod before continuing toward the next tent. There was nothing unusual about the assignment. Every soldier took turns guarding the camp. Some watched during the early evening. Others remained awake through the deepest hours of the night. Still others welcomed the first light of dawn while the rest of the camp slowly awakened. The responsibility belonged to everyone. Until his watch began, there was still time to rest. Our soldier sat quietly outside the tent. Around him, several companions had done the same. No one seemed eager to hurry inside. The night was beautiful. The air felt cool but comfortable. The fire beside them glowed softly, no longer producing tall flames. Instead, glowing pieces of charcoal gave off a steady warmth that invited quiet conversation. One soldier quietly polished the bronze buckle on his belt. Another carefully stitched a loose seam in one of his wool socks. An older companion slowly sharpened the edge of a small utility knife using a flat whetstone. The sound was gentle. Scratch. 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 Each slow movement blended naturally with the peaceful sounds of the camp. Our soldier picked up one of his sandal straps. A little dust had gathered around one buckle during the day's march. Using a small cloth, he wiped it clean. It was not necessary. At least not immediately. But tomorrow would bring another long walk. Better to care for things before they needed repair. The old soldier sitting nearby noticed. "You always clean your straps." Our soldier smiled softly. "My feet thank me later." The older man nodded. "They usually do." Both men returned to their quiet work. There was no need for longer conversation. Nearby, someone added another small piece of wood to the glowing coals. Tiny sparks floated upward like little orange stars before fading into the darkness above. Time moved gently forward. One by one, the soldiers around the fire began standing. Some stretched tired arms above their heads. Others wished their companions a peaceful night before disappearing into nearby tents. Soon only a handful remained awake. The camp had become wonderfully still. From inside the tents came the quiet sounds of blankets being adjusted. Someone sighed contentedly after lying down. Another soldier murmured a few sleepy words before silence returned. The peaceful rhythm of breathing slowly replaced the conversations of the evening. Our soldier looked once more toward the stars. He often wondered how many nights he had spent beneath open skies like this. Too many to count. Some nights had been colder. Some warmer. Some rainy. Others perfectly clear. Yet each had offered the same quiet reminder that the world continued its patient journey regardless of where the camp had become wonderfully quiet. Most of the cooking fires had settled into glowing beds of red coals. Their gentle warmth still drifted through the cool night air, but the bright flames of earlier had almost disappeared. Here and there, a single log shifted as it burned, sending a few tiny sparks upward before they vanished into the darkness. The stars shone steadily above. There seemed to be more of them with every passing hour. The moon had not yet climbed high into the sky, leaving the heavens dark enough for even the faintest stars to appear. Together they formed a silent canopy stretching far beyond the camp, beyond the hills, and beyond the distant forests that surrounded the Roman road. Our soldier remained seated outside his tent. His companions had already settled beneath their blankets. From inside came the soft, peaceful sounds of sleeping men. Someone breathed deeply after a long day of marching. Another quietly turned over in his sleep, causing the leather wall of the tent to rustle for just a moment. Then everything became still once again. He knew his turn for guard duty would begin soon. Until then, he enjoyed the quiet. It was a different kind of silence from the one that greeted the morning. Morning silence carried expectation. Night silence carried rest. Both were familiar. Both had become welcome companions during his years in the army. After a little while, a small bronze bell sounded softly near the center of the camp. Its clear note drifted gently through the darkness. Not loud enough to wake those who slept. Only loud enough for the soldiers assigned to the next watch. Our soldier stood. He reached for his helmet. The cool metal felt almost cold after resting beneath the evening air. He placed it carefully upon his head and fastened a leather strap beneath his chin. Next came his belt. Then his sword. Finally, he lifted his shield. There would probably be no need to use it during the night. Still, it remained part of his duty. Fully prepared. Always ready. He walked quietly between the rows of tents. The camp looked different now. During daylight, it had been filled with movement. Now it rested peacefully beneath the stars. The straight streets lay almost empty. Only a few lanterns burned near important places, their soft yellow light barely reaching beyond a few steps. Shadows covered everything else. At the center of the camp, several soldiers from the next watch had already gathered. The officer greeted each of them with a quiet nod. No long speech was necessary. Everyone understood the routine. The men were assigned different sections of the wall. Some would watch the northern side. Others the eastern or western defenses. Our soldier received the southern wall. It overlooked the open meadow they had crossed before reaching the campsite. He walked toward the wooden gate. The guard standing there belonged to the previous watch. The older soldier smiled when he saw him. Quiet evening. I hope it stays that way. I think it will. The older guard handed over the responsibility with a simple nod. Then he disappeared into the camp, looking forward to his own well-earned sleep. Our soldier climbed the short wooden steps leading to the top of the defensive wall. From there, the view stretched far into the darkness. The meadow lay silver beneath the moonlight. The tall grass moved gently whenever the breeze crossed the open ground. Beyond the meadow stood a line of dark trees. Their branches swayed slowly, their leaves whispering softly together. The night felt alive. Not with danger, but with quiet life. Somewhere in the distance, frogs sang beside a hidden pond. Closer still, crickets continued their endless evening music. An owl glided silently above the meadow before disappearing into the forest without making a sound. Our soldier rested both hands upon the smooth wooden railing. The timber still smelled fresh from being cut that very afternoon. It was remarkable to think that only a few hours earlier these trees had stood in the nearby grove. Now they formed the walls protecting hundreds of sleeping men. He began walking slowly along the wall. His footsteps were careful, measured. The wooden planks beneath his sandals creaked softly now and then. Every few moments he paused. He looked across the meadow, then toward the road, then toward the quiet forest. Nothing moved except the grass. Nothing disturbed the peaceful night. The stars reflected faintly in the narrow stream that curved beside the camp. Its water caught the moonlight like polished silver. The gentle sound of flowing water reached him only when the breeze happened to blow in the right direction. He found the sound comforting. It reminded him of the stream where they had rested earlier that day. How cool the water had felt. How pleasant the shade of the great oak had been. Those quiet moments already seemed far away, even though only one day had passed. Time often felt different during long journeys. Days blended together. Morning followed evening. Marching followed breakfast. Camp followed marching. Sleep followed camp. The rhythm rarely changed. Perhaps that was why the life of a Roman soldier was far quieter than many people imagined. There were battles, of course. Stories would remember those. But stories often forgot the thousands of peaceful nights between them. They forgot evenings spent mending clothing. Afternoons spent digging trenches. Mornings spent eating warm porridge beside quiet fires. Most of military life consisted of ordinary work carried out with steady hands. The extraordinary moments were few. The ordinary ones filled almost every day. Our soldier continued his slow walk. A faint breeze brushed against the feathers fixed to the top of his helmet. He could smell damp grass beyond the walls. Fresh timber beneath his hands. Smoke lingering from the evening fires. The scents mixed together into something that always reminded him of camp life. Not unpleasant. Simply familiar. Near one corner of the wall, another guard appeared from the neighboring section. The two men greeted one another with quiet smiles. Neither wished to disturb the sleeping camp. They stood together for a brief moment, looking out across the peaceful countryside. "It is a clear night," the other guard whispered. "It is. We may see the sun rise before the clouds do." "I hope so." The conversation ended there. Neither man felt the need to say more. They returned to their separate paths, each continuing his slow, patient walk along the wooden defenses. Above them, the moon climbed a little higher. Its pale light spread gently across the camp, shining on rows of leather tents, neatly stacked shields, quiet watchfires, and sleeping soldiers who trusted that someone remained awake while they rested. Our soldier adjusted the strap of his shield and looked once more toward the silent Roman road beyond the meadow. By dawn, that same road would be waiting once again, ready to carry them farther into the wide and peaceful world that stretched beyond the horizon. The night moved forward so gently that it was almost impossible to notice. There was no sudden change. No loud sound to mark the passing of time. Only the slow journey of the moon across the sky and the quiet turning of the stars above the sleeping camp. Our soldier continued his careful walk along the wooden wall. His sandals rested softly upon the planks with each measured step. The rhythm had become almost soothing. Walk a little. Pause. Look across the meadow. Listen. Then continue again. Guard duty was not filled with action. More often, it was filled with patience. The purpose of the watch was not to fight. The purpose was to notice. To remain awake while others slept. To listen carefully to the ordinary sounds of the night so that anything unusual would be recognized at once. Tonight, everything sounded exactly as it should. The breeze whispered through the grass. Leaves rustled quietly in the distant trees. The stream continued its endless conversation with smooth stones beneath the moonlight. An owl called only once before falling silent again. Far away, a fox barked somewhere beyond the forest. Its sharp cry lasted only a moment before the countryside returned to peaceful stillness. Our soldier leaned gently against one of the wooden posts. The timber still felt fresh beneath his hand. Earlier that afternoon, it had been part of a young oak tree standing peacefully at the edge of the meadow. Now it formed part of a wall protecting an entire camp. It was strange how quickly simple things could change their purpose. He looked down into the camp below. The rows of tents rested quietly beneath the pale moonlight. Most of the lanterns had burned low. Only a few remained lit near the command tent and beside the main gate. Their small flames barely moved inside their glass coverings. The camp looked almost like a sleeping village. The straight paths between the tents were empty. Shields leaned neatly against wooden supports. Bundles of firewood waited quietly for the morning. The wagons stood in careful rows with their wheels blocked by stones. Even the mules had settled for the night. One shifted slightly in its sleep before becoming still again. The peaceful order of the camp gave him quiet satisfaction. Everything rested where it belonged. Everything was ready for another day. He remembered his first weeks as a recruit. At that time, even building a simple camp had seemed difficult. There had been ropes that refused to tighten. Tent poles that leaned the wrong way. Trenches that were too shallow. Equipment left untidy after long days of work. Older soldiers had patiently corrected every mistake. Not with anger. Usually with calm words. Sometimes with nothing more than an example quietly shown. Over the years those lessons had become habits. Now his hands often completed familiar tasks before he even thought about them. Military life changed people slowly. Not through grand moments, but through thousands of ordinary routines repeated day after day. He smiled gently. Perhaps that was true of life itself. Most people imagined history as a collection of great events. Great victories. Great speeches. Great journeys. Yet those remarkable moments rested upon countless ordinary days that rarely found their way into stories. Someone had to sharpen the tools. Someone had to bake the bread. Someone had to repair worn sandals. Someone had to stand quietly beneath the stars while everyone else slept. Without those quiet tasks, the famous moments would never have happened. The breeze grew a little cooler. Our soldier pulled his wool cloak slightly closer around his shoulders. The night air often became cold during the hours before dawn, even after warm afternoons. A thin mist had begun forming across the meadow. It drifted slowly above the grass like a pale blanket. The moonlight rested gently upon it, giving the fields a soft silver glow. The distant trees seemed farther away now, their trunks partly hidden by the gathering mist. The world had become quieter still. Even the crickets sang less often. For a little while, there was almost complete silence. The kind of silence that felt full rather than empty. A silence that allowed every small sound to stand out. The faint splash of a fish in the stream. The flutter of wings as a bird shifted in its nest. The gentle creak of leather as our soldier adjusted the strap of his shield. He walked toward the southern gate. There another guard stood watching the road. The younger man looked across the empty countryside. "Nothing tonight," he whispered. Our soldier nodded. "Sometimes nothing is the best news." The younger guard smiled quietly. "I think I prefer quiet nights." "So do I." For a few moments they stood together without speaking. The Roman road stretched away beneath the moonlight. Its smooth stones reflected just enough light to trace its path across the valley before it disappeared beyond a distant hill. It looked peaceful, patient, as though it had no concern for yesterday or tomorrow. Roads simply waited. Travelers came and went. The road remained. Eventually the younger guard continued his own patrol. Our soldier resumed his slow walk along the wall. The hours passed almost unnoticed. From time to time he looked upward. The stars had shifted. Several bright constellations now rested lower above the western horizon. Others had risen higher in the east. The moon itself had begun its gentle descent. Far beyond the eastern hills, the darkness seemed ever so slightly less deep. Not yet light. Only different. The first hint that dawn was quietly preparing to arrive. One by one, the night birds became silent. The owl did not call again. Instead, somewhere in the trees beyond the stream, a single small bird offered the first gentle note of morning. It was only one sound. Soft. Almost uncertain. Then silence returned. A few moments later another bird answered. Then another. The countryside slowly awakened long before the sun itself appeared. Our soldier took a deep breath. The air smelled wonderfully fresh. Cool grass. Damp earth. Faint wood smoke drifting from the last glowing campfire. Morning always carried its own quiet fragrance. He knew his watch would soon end. Another group of soldiers would replace those who had guarded the camp through the night. Then breakfast would be prepared. The tents would come alive with quiet voices. Shields would be lifted once again. The long road would patiently wait beyond a gate. But before the camp truly awakened, there remained one of the calmest moments in a Roman soldier's day, the peaceful hour when the first light slowly touched the horizon, and the world seemed to hold its breath between night and morning. The eastern horizon slowly changed its color. At first, it was almost impossible to notice. The darkness simply seemed a little softer than it had been only a few moments before. The stars above still shone brightly, but the edge of the world had begun to awaken. Our soldier stopped for a moment along the wooden wall. He rested one hand upon the smooth timber and looked toward the distant hills. There was no sound of marching. No clatter of tools. No voices calling across the camp. Only the quiet promise of another day waiting patiently to begin. The breeze had become cooler during the last hours of the night. Tiny drops of moisture rested upon the wooden stakes surrounding the camp. The grass outside the walls shimmered with dew, each blade holding a single drop that reflected the faint light growing in the east. The mist still covered the meadow. It drifted slowly above the ground, moving so gently that it almost appeared to be standing still. Here and there, the tops of wildflowers rose through the pale blanket of fog. Their petals were damp with the night's cool air. A spider's web stretched between two tall stems of grass. It had been invisible in the darkness. Now it sparkled softly as the first hint of daylight reached it. Our soldier smiled quietly. He had passed this same place many times during the night. Only now could he see these small details. Morning had a gentle way of revealing things that darkness had hidden. A bird called once from the nearby trees. Another answered from farther away. Soon the woodland beyond the meadow was filled with soft birdsong. No single bird seemed louder than the others. Together they formed a calm chorus that welcomed the new day. The camp behind him remained mostly asleep. Only a few guards still walked the walls. Their figures moved quietly through the fading darkness. Now and then one paused to look across the countryside before continuing along the familiar path. The officer responsible for the night watch climbed the wooden steps leading to the wall. His cloak moved gently in the morning breeze. He looked toward the eastern sky. "It will be a clear day," he said softly. Our soldier nodded. "So it seems." The officer smiled faintly. "Good marching weather." They stood together for a little while without speaking. Neither man wished to disturb the peaceful silence that belonged to the final moments before sunrise. Far below, one of the camp's mules shifted its weight. Its harness gave a quiet jingle. The sound carried gently through the still air. A second mule answered with a soft snort before settling once more. Nothing else stirred. Then, almost unnoticed, the first narrow beam of sunlight reached the highest branches of the distant trees. The leaves glowed with pale gold. Slowly, the light crept downward. The mist covering the meadow became brighter. The dew upon the grass sparkled like countless tiny pieces of glass. The world seemed fresh, new, untouched. Our soldier had watched many sunrises during his years in the army. Some had appeared above mountains, others above wide rivers. Some had arrived through rain clouds, others beneath skies as clear as this one. No two mornings were exactly alike. Yet each carried the same quiet feeling. Another chance to begin. Another ordinary day waiting patiently ahead. A soft horn sounded from the center of the camp. It was not loud. It did not break the peaceful mood. Instead, it drifted across the tents like a gentle reminder that the night's watch had come to its natural end. The soldiers standing guard began making their way toward the center of the camp. Fresh guards greeted them with quiet nods. There was no ceremony. Only another routine completed exactly as it had been many times before. Our soldier stepped down from the wall. His legs felt a little stiff after hours of slow walking. He rolled his shoulders once beneath his cloak before removing his helmet. The cool morning air touched his hair. It felt refreshing. As he crossed the camp, he noticed that a few tents had already begun to stir. Someone quietly folded a blanket. Another soldier stepped outside and stretched his arms toward the brightening sky. A cook knelt beside yesterday's fire. Using a small bundle of dry twigs, he carefully coaxed the glowing coals back to life. A tiny flame appeared. Then another. Soon the fire burned steadily once again. The familiar smell of wood smoke drifted through the camp. It mixed with the fresh scent of dew-covered grass. Our soldier paused beside the fire. The cook placed another log onto the growing flames. "It will not be long." Our soldier smiled. "I can already smell breakfast." The cook laughed softly. "I think the whole camp can." Indeed, only a few moments later, grain was poured into another large iron pot. Water followed. The slow process of cooking began once again. It was almost exactly the same as yesterday morning. And the morning before that. Life in the Roman army often moved in quiet circles. Wake before dawn. Prepare the fire. Cook the grain. Eat together. Take down the tents. Load the wagons. March until evening. Build another camp. Rest beneath the stars. Then begin again. To someone watching from afar, such repetition might have seemed dull. To the soldiers themselves, it brought something unexpected. A quiet sense of certainty. They always knew what came next. There was comfort in familiar work. There was peace in steady routines shared with trusted companions. As the camp slowly awakened, more soldiers emerged from their tents. Some yawned. Some smiled sleepily at one another. One young recruit carefully folded his blanket with surprising precision. An older soldier noticed and gave him an approving nod. Nearby, another man shook the night's dust from his cloak before hanging it across a wooden peg to catch the morning sun. Everywhere, small tasks quietly filled the camp. No one hurried. The road would still be waiting after breakfast. It always waited. Patient. Reliable. Just beyond the gate. Our soldier looked once more toward the eastern sky. The sun had now arisen fully above the distant hills. Its warm light spread across the freshly built camp, touching every tent, every shield, every cooking pot, and every soldier preparing for another ordinary day. Soon, after one more simple meal, they would begin taking apart everything they had built the evening before. The tents would disappear. The fires would be extinguished. The wagons would be loaded once again. And the remarkable little town that had existed for only a single night would quietly vanish, leaving behind nothing more than a few footprints, a shallow trench, and memories carried forward along the endless Roman road. The morning sunlight spread gently across the camp, warming the dew that still rested on the grass. Tiny drops of water disappeared one by one, carried away by the growing warmth of another clear day. Breakfast had ended. The wooden bowls had been washed and stacked. The last pieces of bread had been wrapped carefully in cloth. For a few quiet moments, the soldiers enjoyed the peaceful stillness that always followed the morning meal. Then, almost without anyone giving a loud command, the camp slowly came alive once more. This time, however, the work was different. Yesterday, they had built a small town. Today, they would gently erase it. Our soldier stood beside the entrance of his tent. For a moment, he simply looked at it. The leather walls had sheltered him from the cool night air. The sturdy poles had held firm despite the evening breeze. For one peaceful night, this simple shelter had been home. Now its work was finished. He untied the first rope. The knot slipped free with practiced ease. Then came the second. And the third. Soon the leather covering began to loosen. Another soldier lifted one side while our soldier removed the wooden crosspiece. The tent slowly folded in upon itself. There was nothing hurried about the work. Each piece had to be packed carefully. The leather was thick and valuable. If folded carelessly, it could crack after many journeys beneath the hot sun. The wooden poles were stacked neatly together. The ropes were coiled into tidy circles. Nothing was thrown aside. Nothing was forgotten. Years of routine had taught every soldier that careful packing in the morning made building the next camp much easier. Nearby, dozens of other tents disappeared one after another. From across the camp came the soft sounds of wooden pegs being pulled from the ground. Leather rustled. Ropes slid through steady hands. Wooden poles tapped gently together as they were gathered into bundles. The camp slowly became more open. Spaces that had been filled with rows of tents only moments earlier now revealed the neat paths beneath them. The little town was quietly fading away. Our soldier carried the folded leather covering toward one of the supply wagons. The wagon stood patiently beside the road, waiting to receive another day's load. Its sturdy wooden wheels were already dusty from many miles of travel. The mule harnessed to the front flicked its ears lazily. It seemed perfectly content to wait. The soldier lifted the heavy bundle onto the wagon. Another man arranged it carefully among the other supplies. Heavy items rested near the bottom. Lighter bundles were placed above them. Everything had its proper place. A well-packed wagon traveled more smoothly. It also made finding equipment easier at the end of the day. Nearby, one young recruit struggled to lift a bundle of tent poles by himself. The pole slipped from his hands and landed softly upon the grass. He looked slightly embarrassed. Our soldier walked over without a word. Together they lifted the bundle. The weight was shared easily between them. Once the poles rested safely upon the wagon, the recruit smiled. "Thank you. It is lighter with two." The younger man nodded. "I am beginning to learn that." We all did. The conversation ended there. Neither man expected praise. Helping one another had become as ordinary as fastening a belt or tying a sandal. The morning continued quietly. Across the camp, another group began removing the cooking equipment. The large iron pots had already cooled enough to handle. Ashes from the cooking fires were carefully scattered. The stones surrounding each fire were returned to the places where they had been found. Soon there would be little sign that breakfast had ever been prepared there. Roman soldiers rarely wished to leave unnecessary traces behind. Even the smallest details received attention. Our soldier noticed one companion walking slowly across the meadow. He paused now and then to pick up small pieces of rope or forgotten wooden pegs. Nothing useful was left behind. Everything that could serve another journey was collected. Not because supplies were scarce, but because waste had no place in military life. As the sun climbed higher, the camp grew steadily emptier. Rows of tents became open ground. The wagons gradually filled. Bundles of tools, sacks of grain, barrels of water, coils of rope, spare sandals, extra shields, and carefully folded blankets all found their places. Nearby, a blacksmith inspected the iron rims of several wagon wheels. One wheel had loosened slightly after yesterday's march. Using a wooden mallet, he gently tapped it back into place. The steady knocking echoed softly across the meadow. Not far away, another soldier carefully brushed dried mud from his sandals. A clean sandal lasted longer than one left covered in damp earth. Such small habits often meant the difference between comfort and pain during a long journey. Our soldier reached for his own shield. Before lifting it, he examined its leather covering. A little dust had settled upon the surface overnight. He brushed it away with the edge of his cloak. Then he checked the handle inside. The leather grip remained firm. Satisfied, he slipped his arm through the familiar straps. The weight settled comfortably against him. It felt almost reassuring. His helmet came next. Then his sword. Finally, he tightened the broad leather belt around his waist. Within only a few moments, he looked much as he had the previous morning. Ready for another day upon the road. The remarkable thing was how quickly the camp had disappeared. Only the defensive wall still remained. The sharpened wooden stakes stood quietly beneath the morning sun. The trench surrounded the empty space where hundreds of men had slept. Soon even these final reminders would no longer serve their purpose. Groups of soldiers walked toward the walls carrying tools. The stakes would be removed wherever possible. The trench would not be completely filled, but its sharp edges would soften with time. Rain would carry earth back into it. Grass would slowly return. Before many seasons had passed, the meadow would once again appear almost untouched. Perhaps a shepherd crossing the field months later might notice the faint outline of the old camp. Perhaps not. Nature was patient. It quietly reclaimed places after people moved on. Our soldier stood for a moment near the gate. He looked back across the open space where the tents had stood only an hour before. It was difficult to believe that an entire village had existed there overnight. Now there was only grass, fresh earth, a few wagon tracks, the quiet memory of voices carried away by the morning breeze. Ahead lay the Roman road once again. Its pale stones stretched toward distant hills, inviting another steady day of walking. The officers were already gathering the marching column into its familiar formation. Shields were lifted. Water skins were checked. Mules stamped softly as the wagons prepared to move. Long before the camp had come and gone, almost as quietly as the passing of a single night. And with the same calm rhythm that had guided every morning before it, the soldiers turned toward the open gate, ready to follow the endless road wherever it wished to lead them next. The last wagon rolled slowly through the gate. Its wooden wheels pressed fresh marks into the soft earth before reaching the smooth stones of the Roman road. Behind it, the quiet meadow rested beneath the morning sun, already beginning to forget the busy night that had just passed. The camp was gone. Only the shallow trench and a few patches of flattened grass remained. Even those small reminders would not last for very long. The wind would scatter loose soil. Rain would soften the edges of the trench. New grass would quietly grow where hundreds of soldiers had slept. Nature had always been patient. It asked for nothing. It simply continued. Our soldier looked back only once. Not because he wished to stay. There was simply a quiet satisfaction in seeing how neatly everything had been left behind. The meadow appeared peaceful once more. It belonged to the birds, the breeze, and the slow movement of clouds overhead. Then he turned toward the road. The marching column had already begun moving. Step by step, the familiar rhythm returned. The steady sound of leather sandals touching stone soon filled the cool morning air. It was a sound that every Roman soldier came to know almost as well as the beating of his own heart. Walk. Breathe. Walk again. The pattern repeated itself without effort. The body remembered what the mind no longer needed to think about. Our soldier adjusted the strap supporting his shield. The leather rested comfortably against his shoulder. It had molded itself over many months to fit exactly where it belonged. When he had first joined the army, the weight had seemed impossible. His shoulders had ached every evening. The straps had rubbed against his skin until they left sore places. Now the shield felt like part of him. He hardly noticed it. The road ahead stretched through wide fields of barley. The stalks had grown tall. Their golden heads swayed together whenever the breeze crossed the countryside. From a distance, they looked almost like gentle waves moving across a quiet sea. Farmers had already begun working. One man guided a pair of oxen pulling a wooden plow through a nearby field. His pace was slow, steady, much like the soldiers themselves. Farther away, a woman gathered herbs beside a small stone wall. A child followed her, carrying a woven basket that seemed almost too large for such small hands. Neither looked up for very long as the soldiers passed. Travelers upon Roman roads were a familiar sight. Life continued. The soldiers continued. Each quietly followed the path set before them. The morning remained pleasantly cool. The sun warmed the land without becoming uncomfortable. Thin white clouds drifted lazily across the sky. From time to time, one would pass in front of the sun, covering the fields with soft shadows before drifting onward again. Our soldier enjoyed these little changes. They reminded him that even ordinary days were never exactly alike. The same road could look different each hour. The same tree cast a different shadow every morning. The same breeze carried new scents depending upon the season. Today the air smelled of ripe grain, fresh earth, wild flowers growing beside the road. Occasionally, a faint scent of pine drifted from distant woods. Small things. Quiet things. Easy to miss unless one walks slowly enough to notice them. A sparrow landed upon one of the roadside stones. It remained perfectly still while the soldiers approached. Only when the first ranks came close did it flutter into the air, disappearing toward a nearby hedge. A butterfly crossed the road just ahead of our soldier. Its pale wings moved gently, almost lazily, before it settled upon a cluster of purple flowers growing beside a milestone. The stone marker stood quietly where it had stood for many years. Its carved numbers had become softer with age, worn gently by rain and wind. Thousands of travelers had passed it. Merchants, messengers, families, officials, soldiers. Each had continued on their own journey. The milestone simply remained. Our soldier reached out as he passed. His fingertips brushed the cool stone for only a brief moment. Then the column continued forward. Around midday, the warmth began to increase. Not enough to make the march difficult. Only enough that many soldiers loosened the edges of their cloaks. The breeze still offered relief whenever it wandered across the open countryside. One of the younger recruits quietly wiped his forehead. The older soldier walking beside him smiled. "You will stop noticing the heat after a while." "I hope so." "You probably will not." The older man chuckled softly. "But you will stop thinking about it?" The younger recruit laughed as well. It was a quiet laugh. The kind shared between companions who understood that some discomforts simply became part of everyday life. The conversation faded naturally. Silence returned. No one seemed uncomfortable with it. Hours spent marching often encouraged quiet thoughts more than long conversations. Our soldier found himself watching the clouds. They drifted so slowly that they almost appeared still. He wondered where they might be by sunset. Perhaps above another valley. Perhaps beyond the hills waiting ahead. Clouds, like soldiers, were always traveling. Only their journeys followed the wind instead of the road. The column crossed a small stone bridge. Beneath it, a narrow stream flowed gently between smooth banks lined with reeds. The clear water reflected the blue sky so perfectly that it almost looked like another path leading beneath the earth. Several ducks floated quietly near the far bank. They barely seemed to notice the soldiers overhead. The bridge itself had stood for many years. Its stones fit together so carefully that hardly any gaps could be seen between them. Our soldier looked down as he crossed. He admired the skill of those who had built it. Roman soldiers often relied upon roads and bridges. Yet they also built many themselves. Some of the men walking beside him had spent weeks constructing bridges across rivers in distant provinces. Others had repaired roads damaged by winter storms. A soldier's life included far more building than many people imagined. It was not unusual to spend more days with a shovel than with a sword. That truth rarely appeared in heroic stories. But it was part of everyday life. The road gradually climbed another gentle hill. At its summit, the countryside opened into a broad valley filled with vineyards. Long rows of carefully tended grapevines stretched across the slopes. Their green leaves shimmered softly beneath the midday sun. Workers moved slowly between the rows, tying branches, and removing weeds with patient hands. The sweet scent of growing vines drifted toward the road. It was faint, pleasant, different from the smell of grain fields they had left behind. Our soldier took a deep breath. Every new landscape carried its own quiet fragrance. Every region offered something slightly different to the traveler who paid attention. The Roman world was vast, but it revealed itself not only through great cities or famous temples. It revealed itself through changing fields, different trees, new birdsong, and the gentle scents carried upon the breeze. The march continued without hurry. One steady step after another. The sun moved slowly across the sky. The wagons rolled patiently behind the column. And somewhere beyond the next hills, another ordinary afternoon awaited, bringing with it new work, new quiet routines, and perhaps the chance to meet the people whose peaceful farms and villages stood beside the great Roman roads. The road curved gently around a hillside. As the soldiers reached the top of the rise, the valley below slowly revealed itself. It was not a large place. There were no towering buildings or crowded streets. Instead, a small village rested peacefully beside the Roman road, surrounded by fields that had been carefully tended for many seasons. Thin columns of smoke rose from a handful of stone chimneys. The smoke drifted lazily into the warm afternoon sky before disappearing among the slow-moving clouds. The houses stood close together. Their walls were built from pale stone gathered from nearby hills. Many roofs were covered with reddish clay tiles that glowed softly beneath the sunlight. A few homes had roofs of straw instead. Both had sheltered families through many quiet winters and gentle summers. Our soldier looked toward the village as the column continued its steady march. He had passed through countless places like this during his years of service. Some villages were larger. Some were smaller. Each had its own peaceful rhythm. Yet they all shared something familiar. People lived simple lives. The work changed with the seasons. Morning brought chores. Afternoon brought more work. Evening brought rest. In many ways, their lives were not so different from those of the soldiers passing by. The first people to notice the approaching column were children playing near a wooden fence. One little boy stopped rolling a small hoop along the dusty path. He shaded his eyes with one hand and watched quietly as the soldiers drew nearer. A younger girl stood beside him, holding a small woven doll made from scraps of cloth. Neither child appeared frightened. Roman soldiers were a familiar sight along these roads. The children simply watched with quiet curiosity. Before long, one of the older villagers stepped outside his home. He leaned lightly upon a walking stick. His gray hair caught the afternoon sunlight as he looked toward the road. He nodded politely as the first ranks passed. Several soldiers returned the greeting with small smiles. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The road belonged to everyone who traveled upon it. As the column entered the village, their footsteps sounded different. The smooth stone road echoed gently between the stone walls of the houses. The steady rhythm of hundreds of sandals became slightly louder before fading again as the soldiers continued forward. The village itself remained calm. A woman swept the front step of her home with a bundle of dried reeds. She paused for a moment as the soldiers passed. Then she quietly returned to her work. Nearby, a potter sat beneath a simple wooden shelter. His hands rested upon a spinning wheel. A lump of soft clay slowly took shape beneath his careful fingers. He hardly looked up. Years of practice allowed his hands to continue working almost without thought. The smooth clay rose little by little into the shape of a simple storage jar. Not far away, the pleasant smell of fresh bread drifted from a small bakery. A baker carried warm loaves from a clay oven using a long wooden paddle. Steam rose gently from the crusts. The rich smell filled the narrow street. Several soldiers breathed a little more deeply as they passed. The scent reminded many of home. Bread had a way of doing that. Our soldier smiled quietly. The smell lingered only for a few moments before the breeze carried it away. Near the center of the village stood a small public well. A young woman lowered a wooden bucket into the cool water below. The rope creaked softly as it slipped through her hands. When the bucket reached the surface once again, tiny drops of water sparkled in the sunlight before falling back into the stone basin. She stepped aside respectfully as the soldiers walked past. One elderly man sat upon a simple wooden bench beneath the shade of a fig tree. A small brown dog rested peacefully beside his feet. The old man scratched the dog's ears absent-mindedly while watching the column pass. The dog opened one eye. It watched the soldiers for a moment. Then, deciding there was nothing interesting to see, it closed its eyes once again. The village seemed wonderfully unhurried. Nobody rushed from place to place. Nobody spoke loudly. Life continued at its gentle pace. The arrival of the soldiers was simply another ordinary event in the day. Our soldier noticed small gardens beside many homes. Rows of onions grew neatly beside patches of beans. Herbs filled the air with their pleasant fragrance. Mint, thyme, rosemary. A few chickens wandered freely between the gardens, scratching gently at the dry earth in search of seeds and insects. One proud rooster stood upon a low stone wall. He watched the passing soldiers with great seriousness before giving a loud crow, as though announcing the arrival of every traveler himself. Several nearby soldiers smiled. One quietly whispered, "He takes his work very seriously." The man beside him nodded. "He probably believes he commands the whole village." Their smiles faded gently. The peaceful silence returned. The column continued. At the edge of the village stood a small blacksmith's workshop. The wide doorway remained open to allow the afternoon breeze inside. From within came the steady ringing of hammer against iron. Not fast. Not harsh. Only slow, measured strikes. The blacksmith lifted a glowing piece of metal from the forge with long iron tongs. He placed it carefully upon the anvil. Then he shaped it with patient blows. Each strike echoed softly across the village street. The smell of warm iron mixed with charcoal smoke drifted toward the road. Our soldier watched for a moment as he passed. A good blacksmith was valued everywhere. Farmers depended upon strong tools. Travelers needed horseshoes. Soldiers required dependable equipment. Quiet craftsmanship supported every part of Roman life. Soon the houses became fewer. The gardens gave way once more to open fields. The sounds of the village slowly faded behind them. The smell of fresh bread disappeared into the afternoon breeze. Only the steady rhythm of marching remained. The road stretched onward between orchards filled with olive trees. Their silvery leaves shimmered softly beneath the sunlight. The branches twisted gently with age, showing the slow work of many passing decades. Some of the oldest trees had probably been growing long before our soldier was born. Perhaps they would still stand long after his own journey had ended. He found something comforting in that thought. People came and went. Seasons changed. Armies marched across distant lands. Yet the olive trees quietly continued producing fruit year after year. Nature measured time differently from people. Much more patiently. The afternoon shadows had begun to grow a little longer now. The heat of the day was slowly becoming gentler. Birds returned to the branches after the soldiers passed. the quiet countryside settled once more into its familiar rhythm. Ahead, the road disappeared into another grove of trees where welcome shade waited beneath wide green branches. The officers at the front glanced toward the lengthening shadows and quietly began considering where the next evening's camp might be built before the sun slowly slipped below the western horizon. As the soldiers continued along the quiet Roman road, the small village slowly disappeared behind them. The scent of fresh bread was carried away by the afternoon breeze, and the gentle sounds of everyday life became softer until they could no longer be heard. Before them, the road stretched into the peaceful countryside. It curved gently between olive trees whose silver-green leaves whispered quietly whenever the wind passed through their branches. The warm sunlight rested upon the old stones beneath their feet, just as it had done for countless travelers over many generations. Our soldier walked at the same calm, steady pace. One step, then another. His shield rested comfortably against his shoulder. His sandals followed the familiar rhythm of the road. Nothing remarkable happened. There were no great speeches. No famous battles waiting just beyond the next hill. Only another ordinary afternoon filled with simple work, patient walking, and quiet thoughts. Perhaps that was the truest part of a Roman soldier's life. History often remembers moments of triumph and struggle, but most days were made of quieter things. A warm bowl of porridge before sunrise. The careful tightening of a sandal strap. The sound of rain falling softly upon a leather tent. The comfort of sharing bread with familiar companions. The steady work of building a camp before evening. A peaceful watch beneath a sky full of stars. Then another morning. Another road. Another ordinary day. Season after season, the rhythm continued. Roads led to new valleys. New rivers. New forests. Yet each evening ended much the same way, with tired feet, simple meals, gentle conversations, and the welcome comfort of rest before tomorrow quietly arrived. The sun slowly drifted lower in the western sky. Long shadows stretched across the fields. Birds settled into the branches of ancient olive trees. A cool breeze crossed the countryside, carrying with it the soft scent of grass, warm earth, and distant wood smoke. The road continued beyond the hills, disappearing into the golden light of evening. The soldiers followed it without hurry. Without complaint. Simply placing one foot in front of the other, as they had done so many times before. And as their figures slowly became smaller against the wide landscape, the countryside returned to its gentle silence. The breeze continued through the trees. The birds sang their quiet evening songs. The old Roman road remained exactly where it had always been, waiting patiently for tomorrow's travelers. And somewhere beyond the next gentle hill, another peaceful evening was already beginning, just as countless evenings had before, allowing the long, quiet story of ordinary lives to continue without fanfare, without haste, and without end. The light softened. The sounds grew quieter. The road stretched onward into the distance. And with nothing more than the steady rhythm of footsteps fading into the calm evening air, the day gently came to rest.